Okay, this is Professor Scott Easley for the Pipelines course, going over how to model the phantasm ball. I'm currently using Maya 2015, and everybody should have a similar copy. For the best speed and quality of this recording video software, I've slightly shrunk my screen view here, so if I've truncated a couple of menus, I will go over them. So let's jump in. First of all, let's make sure that we have the same world that we're working in. If you come down here to the icon in the lower right hand corner, rest your cursor over it, it'll say Animation Preferences. If you click on it, it will basically bring up the Preferences window. You can get the same thing by going over here to the Maya menus, clicking on Window, going down to Settings and Preferences, and clicking on Preferences. You get pretty much the same thing. And what we are interested in is specifically that we click on, in this column, the word Settings, that we are going to be working in not centimeters but foot. You might as well switch to film 24 to 30 and press Save, and it should change the grid for you. If you press the hotkey F as in Frank, it should frame what you have selected. As you can see, when you have nothing selected, by default it will frame the grid. So we've essentially pulled back. You can also use your scroll wheel to go in and out. Some of the camera controls really quickly, now that we can see the grid. If you hold down the Alt key and you use your left mouse key simultaneously, it should rotate the camera around. And if you hold down the Alt key and then the middle and left mouse button, you should get a nice scaling going on. And if you hold down the Alt key and just the middle button, you basically track, meaning that your camera moves parallel to the grid. So now that we know where that is, and press F to orient yourself again, come up here to Display and click on Grid. Now we've sorted out the world's rules, you know, that we're in feet, not centimeters, etc. We want to make sure that we're all dealing with the same grid. So if you click on Grid, not here as in the name, but you click on the far right square, you should come up with the options for the grid. And I prefer to type in 10, 1, and 1. And when that's applied, we also should have pretty much the same grid, so that when we read in these similar spheres, you should see them at roughly the same size. So let's begin. Going under the menu Create, make sure that you've got polygon primitives selected, not NURBS primitives. They are deceptive in that they have basically the same things in them. But we're using polygon primitives, and we also want to make sure that interactive creation is checked off. By default it's checked on. The reason we don't want it on is because Maya will bother you for exact width and height measurements of anything you read in first by dragging your mouse around, and sometimes you just want a bloody sphere. So turning that off basically will pop in this geometry without any problems or further questions. Now if you go, of course, to the options for each of these bits of geometry, you can enter the numbers for your default setup. And I think it's something around these numbers when you begin: 1, 20, 20, 10, 20, 20. And if not, that's okay, because we're going to read in this geometry and then change it once it's in. So in this case, just read in a sphere. There we are, there's a basic sphere. And once you've read it in, if you go here to this window, the channel box, you can evoke it by making sure that none of these other four icons are on, save for the channel box icon. Then you should be able to see Channel Box Layer Editor. And we'll be using this quite a lot, as we have done in class. Once an object is read in and you have it selected, you can see its history down here if you scroll beyond its location in Cartesian coordinates. And the inputs is basically its history. So if you click on Polysphere 1, scroll further, you can see what it is made of. And in this particular case, we want to make sure that we all have the same sphere. So type in 10 and then type in 18 and then 18, and you can actually see this change as I was typing those numbers in. And that means that we all now have not only the same sphere and the same world, but it's now constructed of the same lines, which is great. So another real quick refresher, remember that when you press 4 using the number pad at the top of your keyboard, not the one that's the matrix of 3 by 3 on the far right of your keyboard, you should be able to fluctuate between wireframe view and then if you press 5, hard shaded view. Because we're interested also in the construction of these lines, because we're going to be dealing with the components that construct the phantasm ball, one of the things that we'll be using is under shading here, and this is best exemplified by not having an object selected. When you have the object selected, you can see its wireframe. When you click off, you see that nothing is selected, so you can't really get an idea of its integrity. But we always want these wires to be shown. Well, let's do that by going under shading and running down to this selection here called wireframe on shaded, meaning please show me the wireframe on anything whether I have it selected or not. And again, integrity of the geometry itself is very important for the tutorial to work, so let's turn that on and make sure that you've got the same sphere that we all do. And we're going to start using the modeling tools. And in Maya 2015, they have some interesting new tools that that can come in, specifically that you've got not just your usual mesh and edit mesh, but you now have this mesh tools, including this modeling toolkit. And if you click on that, then suddenly this toolkit comes up here on your right. Be aware of that because it can kind of, disorient some people when they suddenly don't see the channel box layer editor. And you can turn off the modeling tools and suddenly your channel box layer editor comes back. Or if you have all of these selected, although it gets very messy on the screen, be aware that nothing really disappears. It's actually kind of hiding here in these side tabs. So the modeling toolkit is something we're going to be getting more and more into. For the time being, I would like to make things a little more simple for people. So I've redone this tutorial, so we're using even simpler methods than in previous tutorials to make this phantasm ball. So pressing the space bar when you have your cursor in the main view window does separate it out to apparently Stygian blackness. There we go. Alright, so, well, that's interesting. I was physically inside the ball, and so I've just gone into each of the windows and pressed F to kind of orient it and gone back to 4 for wireframe. What you can do, since we're only going to be dealing with the bottom half of this geometry, is to delete all of the faces that we don't need on the top half of this sphere. And that's best done by selecting the faces. Now you can do so by going to the menu here saying, the drop-down menu of select face, or since you're now in the face mode, and anything you do a selection square around will select those faces. It is a bit dangerous because it not only selects that which is facing you, but with a simple turn here you can see that it was selecting faces behind it as well. So this gives you the illusion you've selected exactly what you want. This shows you that Maya is trolling you, so beware. So another way of getting the faces mode selected is by right-clicking and holding down your mouse key, your right mouse key, and you have all these selections as long as you keep the mouse key down. And they're, these pop-up menus, and they can really be used well to speed you along when you model things. But I do like people to be aware where these same requests are in the typical menu up here in Maya. However, you can also select face by using these, as they're called, marking menus, pop-up menus. And with it selected, everyone should select the faces that constitute the top half of the sphere in one of the orthographic views. Again, we were pressing the space bar a minute ago to go between these views. And the reason it's better to sometimes do so in an orthographic view is because you can accidentally select what is behind, or in this case, if your camera is not sorted correctly, it looks like you've selected everything, but in fact, you can tell by the perspective window here, you have not. In fact, I think that'll be obvious here. Kind of looks a paid boy haircut. Ugh. So the way you can get around that is make sure that your camera goes all the way through. Another way that you can make sure that this happens in Maya is a nice little shortcut that I enjoy using, which is that if you select the topmost faces, and I'm doing so here in the perspective view, but you can do it in the side view, and you verify that it has that entire ring, there's not one ring missing, then you can press the greater than symbol, which is, if you look down, you can just see the greater than symbol is shift period. But what Maya takes it at is, please grow this selection. And so it's going to grab the series of concentric rings that are the face all the way around, which is pretty cool. Another way to do it is when you're in selection mode and you've selected only a few things, beware, if you use the shift key and reselect, it will sort of toggle what is and what is not selected. If you, however, use the shift key and the control key, it will only select. So you could do it face by face if you are inclined. You can do, I mean, this is tedium, but it is a way around it, and it allows you to just sort of make a nice collection of things. And you're going to want to verify absolutely in wireframe before you do any deleting that you have all the faces that you wanted to have selected. That's another way to have it selected. When they are selected, all of them, then press delete. And you can see that it just takes care of that entire selection. It's arguable that you could do so piecemeal, that you just start knocking them out like a hockey goalie's teeth. There's a strange analogy. But you can do so, and you know, do so in several steps. You don't have to do it in one fell swoop like I did. So continuing on, we have this object, which is the lower sphere of the phantasm ball, and we want to select using the shift key, going around just left selecting, shift left selecting, every other face. And you can see that I accidentally chose one in the far distance there. So now we have all of these faces that kind of look like the parapet of a castle, I suppose. And you can press delete, and now what you have is this nice sort of medieval cauldron looking edge, like the ramparts on a castle. And we want to now take the edge, this you know, sort of club tooth edge, and extrude it in. So I want to go now from face mode to edge mode. And we could go through this really tedious process of just holding the shift key and selecting that little kind of up and down pattern ad infinitum all the way around. But let me show you another way of doing it. And again, what I did was I held down the marking menu and I chose edge instead of face. We're now in component mode for edge. Same thing can be up here under the selection for Maya's menu. Select edge. And as this thing constantly reminds me, you can toggle between the object and component selection by merely pressing F8. So the shortcut I was talking about is that if you select something and it's the obvious outer lip of your mesh, sometimes Maya knows it's the outer lip, even if it dives up and down in this kind of strange pattern. And so what you can do is you can, under the Select menu, go down to Select Contiguous Edges. That's the second from the bottom selection. If you use Select Contiguous Edges, in some cases it'll select the whole thing. Now in this case it doesn't, but be aware of that. The other trick, if Maya is still being sort of obstinate, is you merely double click the edge, and that does select it. So if you double click the edge, it does a fast pass on where it thinks that edge is. Because our geometry is so simple, in fact I'll turn off the grid here. Because our geometry is so simple, it had a pretty easy time figuring out where the edge is and accounting for that pattern along the ring there. So with that edge selected, and only that edge, never this inner edge, but only that which is not, landlocked by more geometry, you want to come up here to these this command, Edit Mesh, and be very careful with this because I'm going to ask you to extrude, but before you do, please be aware that there is now a vertex extrude, there is an edge extrude, and there is a face extrude, and you will get unwanted desires, unwanted effects from your desire to extrude in a certain direction, and you have to choose the right extrusion for what you have selected. In this case, edge extrude is what you want. Choose only this. Alright, so before you do anything, just leave this alone for a minute. We went over this in class, but I want to go over it in the tutorial. Maya takes sort of its aggregate selection of everything and chooses a rather bizarre direction in which to take things depending upon the normals, but it looks like it's favoring the left side there. In any event, we don't want it going in that direction. What we're going to be doing is scaling. So before you do anything, before you touch any of these and move it, you want to come over here to Scaling, Scale tool, which also you can use as the hotkey R, which is what this pop-up is showing me right now, and just press it. So now our control is exactly in the middle of all of these edges, and since it is it's made new polygon shapes from each of those edges, you can scale them all in one fell swoop to about let's say about two units in. And we'll bring back the grid here so you can kind of see what that is. I guess it's more like 2.5. So a pretty thick grid, a pretty thick edging now. And the second step you want to do with Maya is to save your work. Save Scene As. And I've made a little folder here, Pipelines 2015. This is my previous Phantasm Ball I was doing. Now, I've done something correct, which is the naming of this. I've done something incorrect, which is I've saved it as a Maya binary. And I want people to save it as Maya ASCII files, because these ASCII files are parsable, and a binary file is much tighter and fairly unforgiving if you ever, God forbid, have to look at it for any reason or information about where its textures are or what version of Maya it is. It's very unhelpful. So I just learned to use ASCII. We have enough memory now. Don't worry about the space it takes up, which is considerably larger with ASCII than binary, but we just stay away from binary. So what I am going to do is I'm going to say this is my first incarnation, Phantasm Ball _1. Please do the same. And we're going to be saving often because Maya, you cannot blame Maya for being software that occasionally freaks out and dies on you. And it will. Maya hates people and is doing what it can to bring on Skynet early. So you want to foil it by saving your work and save it in the versions that I've just shown you, _1, _2, etc. Another little trick when we get into saving our scenes is never save scene. Save Scene As, so you can add a version number. If you save scene, you will continually save over the same file, and when Maya dies in the middle of its latest saving, then you've ruined everything. So that the onus for that is really on the student. Another trick you're going to get used to is when you save scene as, you can actually click on the name, come down here and just change the version number, and it's actually very easy and very quick to save. So with this first version saved, we now have the chance to read in another sphere, and this particular sphere is going to have a radius of 9, 18, 18. These numbers guarantee that it fits fairly snugly inside of that little egg holder that we've just made, that Ren Fair egg holder. With it nestled in there, we now want to get rid of all of the geometry that we don't see. So if we press 4, you can see that there's this whole underside that we no longer need. If we go into face mode and grab using perspective, which is dangerous, but hey, you know, we live dangerously here in CS. You can grab the entire bottom half, make sure you've got all that you need, and you can delete. So now what we're doing is we're kind of cleaning up all the geometry that we don't need from this new section. Another thing you want to do is that you want to put the layer into a template. So we've been concentrating on this in the class, and to go over the layers, you can create layers and basically put objects in them, much like Photoshop. In this case, we're going to be doing so with 3D objects, and so we can grab them both, click on layers, and people usually create an empty layer. Here's a nice little shortcut, is create layer from selected. Now when we create a layer for the first time, we have that which we want to put into it. That option is a great way to simply make a layer and already include whatever you have selected as members. Very quickly done. If you double click on the name, P-ball layer, and now we can verify that both of these objects are in that layer by simply clicking on the visibility channel, and it disappears. If they stayed visible, then you'd know. And also we can go to the second square and kind of run through template, reference, and sort of a really actually there mode is what we call it. So these are now securely fastened into this layer so that we can make this visible and not as we continue making small additions to the Phantasm ball here. Okay, in step 2, we have made this upper egg, and now pressing the space bar we can go back into the front and the right view and the top view. Choose one that looks from the side, either front or right, as we now want to come up here and specifically choose, using the right menu, the right button mouse menu, vertex. And I'm just going to select these top vertices of the sphere, just so that when I next press F for frame, I get a little closer to where I want to work. And by pressing again selecting just the vertices again, I have a much better view at this point to select the ring of vertices I want. Pressing the space bar and going back to the perspective view can validate if I have exactly that ring selected, which I do. So what I can do now is I could have selected just the faces. Ultimately I want just the faces in this selection. But I chose vertices because I want to show people that you can, depending upon the view that you have, go between selecting vertices and faces, things like that. So under select, you've got an option here under convert selection. Again, these are vertices, but we can convert that selection two faces, and it's selected a pretty wide swath. But I just want the inner ring here, so what can I do? Well, one of two things. We can go and just select the single vertex at the top, go into select, convert selection, two faces, there. Or, super simple, just go in here and choose faces as your option of what to select, and there, boom, same thing. So with that inner ringlet of faces selected at the top of the sphere, we can go again into edit mesh as we want to extrude, but this time we want to extrude not edges but faces. Be very careful when you do this because not all extrusions are the same. In Maya 2015, you need to, as the user, delineate exactly which extrusion you want. So be judicious in these extrusions. So under face, extrude, again we've got that kind of, you know, strange little, I will extrude it in the direction of the normal, and we don't really want that, so without clicking anything on the mouse, I simply press W, which is the hotkey for translate, or you can click, make sure your next mouse click is right here for the move tool, translate, and pull upward, just using this yellow arrow, which is in the Y direction only. I'm not grabbing the middle, that would go haywire. I'm being very careful about just grabbing the arrowhead on just this axis so that even if my mouse goes kind of left and right, it stays in that axis. So now that we've pulled that free of the sphere with its newfound ring of polygons, I can go in here to the side view again, pull back a bit with my scroll bar and my mouse, holding down the Alt key, middle mouse gets me to track, and I want to move this up about, let's say, 5 units. So I can either eyeball it, or better yet, I can do the trick of holding down the X key. You can see the cursor change there when you do so. And this lets you know that it will now snap to the grid lines. And again, if I want it just to snap to the grid lines on the in the horizontal plane, then again, I'm very careful about just choosing the top of this arrowhead, as it will snap only to those layers. So let's say that that's about where I want to put it for 5. Let it go. Done. We also want to select and delete those faces. So something you might have caught me doing previously is when I have something selected, so there's these vertices, and then I want to show you, okay, be very careful about the edit mesh, and then I click off, oh, I haven't selected them. Do I have to go back in and select them again? Not really. You can press undo. In fact, I'll press undo twice more, 3 times more, and it'll go back to the faces that I had selected. I don't endorse doing undo as a rule. You shouldn't have it in your tool belt as something you expect, but considering what I'm undoing, I'm just going back to a series of selections. It's fairly uncomplex for Maya to do that. You can get away with that. Be very careful when you deal with things like tweaking the model itself and you go and undo 10 moves. Maya can crash on you. So it is something you can catch me doing quite a lot. It's easy, but don't depend upon it, because sometimes it's just easier to say, you know what, I'll just select the faces myself, thanks. Also remember, whenever you select something, even though it selects more than you want, such as in the case of the cylinder here, you can actually hold down the Shift key and unselect what you don't want. So that's another way of getting things pretty quick. With those faces selected, just press delete. There we are. And we can go back in the right, by either the right mouse button marking menu, go to object mode, or we can just press F8. Goes from object to component. In object mode, and just for the purpose of this visual demonstration, turn off wireframe on shaded. So in object mode, wireframe on shaded is off. You can see that there's this kind of banding, this faceting going on, because when you extrude, you actually extrude polygons whose normals are very hard. And in this case, we don't want that. We want it to look a little more rounded. So just in selecting the faces that are this, this piston that is coming out of the top of the sphere, have just those faces selected, and you can go then to the drop down menu for normals and go down to soften edge. Well, with that edge soften, that should look pretty nice, but now you get this weird dark bit here at the bottom. Well, the reason is you've got frankly more than a 90-degree angle here, and it's trying to resolve this as smooth, and it's throwing things off. This is such a gradual curve, it's easy to make smooth. Same thing with the rings that we've just done here on the inside of the outside of the pipe. But it's at this little junction, this part where the pipe suddenly goes into a sphere. It's just too much to try and resolve that as smooth, and frankly we don't want it as smooth. So if you go into edge mode, and remember what I talked about with double clicking the edge, and if that's too much, just click one edge, press F, and then you're right up on it. It's all up in your grill, and it gives you a much better chance of selecting the entire ring from here. Double click. Okay, there we are. Check in wireframe if you have just that ringlet selected. Looks good. And then under normals we do the opposite, harden edge. And when you go back to shaded mode, go back to object mode, you can now see that it's much easier for this to resolve the shading as a whole, because you've given it a point where you're saying don't calculate this, leave this hard. So it's saving all of its smooth calculations for the normal of how to play with the light on these relatively softer areas. Something else we want to do is bring up the outliner, and let's start the process of being clean, which is when you have an object that you've got pretty much as a section of what you're trying to build. Double click the name here in the outliner, and let's rename it P-ball top, and you can rename this as P-ball bottom. Another little trick I like to do is double click on something you've already named, and you can use Control C for copy, double click here, Control V, and just change it. Again, you can double click here and type the whole thing in, but these are just little shortcuts that I'm trying to throw your way so you don't spend a lot of time being a stenographer. So with these things all sort of smoothed out and all the different operations that we've done to both the P-ball top and bottom, do take a look here on the far channel box. Remember that these inputs originally were things we played with to get the granularity exactly as we wanted it. But now it's also listing all of the different operations we've done, some pieces more than others. And frankly, that history is a bit problematic. It's the buildup of history that when it gets to a certain point increases the probability that Maya will crash. And it's just a good job to go in and when you're about to save again, delete all by type, history. This is confusing as it's near delete by type, but this history delete only happens to something you have selected. In this case we have nothing selected. So the illusion is we got rid of the history, but in fact it's all still there. The more extreme measure is delete all by type, history, and you can actually watch the history on the right of the screen go away when I finish this operation. Boom. So now we have something that's very slimmed down in Maya's mind to just these objects. They've always been like this, man. So come in here and do not save scene as. Go to the proper area, click on the name, and just change the version number. And that ends step 2. Step 3. Since we are going to be making a new part for the Phantasm Ball, all of this existing geometry that we've created is actually just going to be in our way. Luckily, because it's part of this layer, we can simply click on the visibility and it's gone. So as you can see in the outliner, it still exists. It's simply not in our way anymore. So let's go up and create another cylinder, Polygon Primitives cylinder, and this one will be under Polycylinder Inputs. I want to make sure that everyone's using the same setup. So under Radius, let's put 2. Under height, let's put 10 and watch it grow when that finishes. Boom. And then on the subdivision axis, I'd like to have 10. There we are. Again, this class is not just about modeling, but low poly modeling. We're only going to model what we need. So sometimes the default geometry that you get from Maya is much more than we need. We certainly didn't need 20 sides to this cylinder if we can get pretty much the same effect by just grabbing something with 10. Now note the faceting here, of course, and we can cure that quickly by just going in on faces. But remember that if we do this, we're going to get that weird rounded bit up here that we then have to cure. And since we're going to be doing a lot of extrusions, let's leave that off for now. So what I'd like you to do is select the faces, just for the express purpose of shift, selecting just the top faces. Let's do that again. So to select the top faces, you can do it one of two ways. Select every bit of it, and then shift unselect, using the same left mouse key, the stalk of this cylinder. Or you can go in and just try and carefully grab each face, like so. Or you can also grab a vertex and come up to select, convert selection to faces. Either or, dealer's choice. But the end product is that we want to have just the flat top of this cylinder's faces selected, because we're going to be coming up and making sure that we extrude the faces. Now with that extrusion there, again it's going in the direction of the normals. We don't want that. We actually want to go to the scaling, R, and being very careful to grab the middle yellow control, we're going to be doing a uniform scale out. Now I know it looks a bit like a spider web, but it's meant to. Leave it well enough alone. Continue to have those faces selected. If you make a mistake and click off the screen like so, press the undo key, Z, and go back to when you had those faces selected. So we're not quite done yet. Same thing. If we go up to mesh, we go up to edit mesh, and we go to extrude faces again, this time we're going to pull it up. So I've got the move tool activated, and we are essentially constructing like a Mario Brothers pipe. See how that nail head is kind of starting to resemble a pipe? Well, the extrusion now is going to do the opposite. We're going to now scale it inward so we can drop this down and have an inner ring as well. So with it selected, let's do the extrusion one more time. Make sure that you've got scale back and you're grabbing the yellow box so it's all uniform. And try to make it so that you can see it's a little bit thinner, it's a little smaller circumference than this outer pipe, because we are going to do one last extrusion and drop it down. And from here, again, we just drop it down. Boom. So now we've got this cool little Mario pipe. Well, we need to fix a couple of things. First of all, if you go to wireframe, you can see that we have some polygons here at the bottom that no one's ever going to see. And this is one of the rules of low poly modeling, is you want to get rid of these inner rings that that no one is going to see, but the computer is still drawing. If you have a mobile game engine where every polygon counts, you don't want these hidden polygons that no one's seeing still being drawn. So how can you select them? Well, luckily in wireframe mode you can select everything in one fell swoop, and then holding down the shift key, select the stalks, and it should have just those ringlets at the bottom selected, both of which we don't need. So when you're sure that you have just those selected, press delete. So now what we have is this kind of open pipe, and you can see down, and that's good. But the second thing we want to fix is that we now have this sort of uneven bottom of the pipe. And frankly, this pipe is a little too long for us. We don't need it to be that tall. So what I want to do is come back into select, let's go to vertex mode. You caught me there using the menu. With it in vertex mode, I like to go into the side view, F, and then pull back. Or you can also use the hotkey for A, which means I will frame all. And since this phantasm ball is not visible, the only thing it's going to pull back to see the entirety of is this pipe. Now, what I'm interested in doing is actually flattening all of these vertices out at the 0, 0, 0 midpoint, right here. How best can I do that? Well, I can do it a couple of ways. First of all, I can do so from the side and just bring them up like that. That's a pretty good eyeballing, but it's still eyeballing. So you can do this one of two ways. I'll go through different methods. First of all, I want to try scaling them. And here's my reasoning. I want these two to be on the same plane. So if I scale them, not uniformly, certainly not in the X or the Z axis, but only in Y, only up and down, they should slowly come together. And if I continue scaling in that way, they slowly exist on the same plane. But I can ensure that they will be on the same plane when I select all of those vertices again, and I'm now in the translate mode, and we use the trick that we did for when we had a cylinder top on the top of the phantasm ball sphere. Remember that we pressed the X key to let it do a grid snap, and we're only going to grab the arrow that goes up in X. So now all of those points are snapping, and we've hit 0, 0, 0. Now, if you're thinking, well, couldn't I have grabbed both of those and snapped them up and they would both have aligned? Yes, you could have. Again, there's many different ways of doing the same thing in Maya. The idea here is not to have you repeat exactly what I do by rote, although right now that's perfectly reasonable, but to plant the idea that there's many different ways of modeling the same thing. So we've essentially flattened out this tube here, and we have now a concern with the normals. Again, we've got this very faceted looking pipe, and we can do one of two things to straighten out that faceting. We either grab each of these inner rings, sort of the lip of each of these rings, and make sure that they're hard, or grab these other side faces and make them smooth. It's kind of 6 of 1, and I like to go here to the normals in object mode, select the whole object, and just soften the whole thing. Okay, again, those crazy, you know, that weird lighting wherever we've got these edges that are 90 degrees or more that Maya can't resolve. So we want to help it out by going into edge mode, double clicking, shift double clicking, until we've selected pretty much every ring that is a lip on this pipe. And by lip I mean only that which is a circle, not the vertical lines that are running up and down the object. So with these specific rings selected, I suppose I could even select the inner one here. Slick. You can go up here to normals and click on harden edge, and Maya's having a much better time sort of thinking about what it needs to resolve with the smoothing. And these sides, the shaft of the pipe, is all we really care about, because that's what's going to catch the light. So you've eased Maya's head considerably in its calculations. So the next thing we want to do is bring back the phantasm ball, which will, once we make it visible, swallow that new piece, and we can just have the piece, going to select it here in the outliner. We know what the cylinder is. In fact, I will now rename it P-ball pipe, and I'm going to raise it up until it just crests the top of this sphere. So just the slightest bit of interpenetration is all I'm looking for, as far as it's sort of resting like a chimney on the top of the sphere. You don't want to have it, you know, you don't want to have the floating edge, so make sure it is stuck a little bit into the sphere so that it looks like there's a nice edge to it. And the next thing we want to do is, since the center of this sphere is 0, 0, 0, we want to grab the pipes and make sure that their rotation pivot points are also in the same area, so that when we rotate it, it actually rotates around this this globe, rather than what it will do now, which is just rotate on its base. So let's take a look here. If I press Insert, I go into the mode of modifying the center pivot point, and you can also get the same effect by going here to Modify Center Pivot. It basically goes into the pivot mode here, but if you use Center Pivot, it will automatically sort of snap the center pivot to the middle of the object. What you want to do is you actually want to manipulate it by hand. So in this case, with it selected, and I can verify that I'm in pivot point manipulation mode because there are no arrowheads, I can still use the same grid snap trick we've been using with vertexes thus far by pressing X and grabbing the green stalk of the Y translation, even though it's a little slippery, and making sure I pop it down to 0, 0, 0. And I can circle around to verify that it has in fact landed exactly at 0, 0, 0 coordinates like I need it to. Now if you rotate the object, notice that its rotation aligns exactly along the sphere and keeps that nice little bit of tangency. So for rotate X, let's type in 45 to make sure that its rotation is numerically sound between 0 and 90. And bringing up the outliner, I would like to show a trick we're going to be using to put its two other brothers over here on the other side exactly so that there's a perfect equidistant set of pipes on the sphere. So in this case, we could duplicate this object, but frankly would not rotate correctly, because we've already sort of compromised it by rotating it in the X direction. If we then need to rotate it in the Y direction, it will actually get squirrely. We don't want that. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using the function in Maya called grouping. And when you group something, it basically becomes the child to a parent. In this case, it will be a null node. So I've just grabbed the pipe, and you can tell in the outliner what's happened. When I click on the expansion plus here of the group's name, it shows that the object is still underneath it. But if you look at the rotation orientation, when I go up to the group, it's now in world coordinates. So that means that if I were to duplicate not the pipe, but this group with the pipe in it, and I will duplicate it, when I rotate this now, just along the y-axis, it keeps its rotation orientation of 45 degrees while allowing me the ability to rotate it around the globe. And that's because it doesn't deal with any of this gimbal lock that happens when you start doubling and tripling up your rotations in different axes. So if you are to move this along, we just type in the numbers that would be equidistant to 360 divided by 3. So in this case it would be -120. And if we duplicate this again, I'm just using the hotkey of Control D, which you can see up here. It always puts the hotkey next to the command. I've made another group, and I simply type in 120 from here. So now we have something, since this is 0, rotation Y, and this is 120, this is negative, we know they are in fact equidistant. Now for my last trick of the night, also as a side note, I would like to notice that once we cleaned up one pipe, when we duplicated them, the normals were cleaned up in the other ones. It's just a bit of housekeeping that you'll want to remember as you make more complex models that have a propagation of, say, turrets on a battleship. When you have a dozen or so of them, sort out your master mold first. Get all the normals done and then duplicate it, and it'll save you from having to clean up each and every one of them later. So for my last trick of the night, what I'd like to show you is that these groups, although they've helped us put these pipes exactly where we need them, are really no longer necessary. And one of the commands you can use in Maya is not just group, but it's antithesis, which is strangely not ungroup, but rather unparent. Now what I've done is I've grabbed everything on the screen in this kind of big selection square. What Maya does when you use the 3D viewing port is it does not select groups, it instead selects the objects underneath. So you'll see here in the outliner that I have in fact not just selected the top and the bottom of the phantasm ball, but I have also selected the pipes themselves, not the groups. So with all these things selected, I come up here under Edit, and again I do not use Ungroup, I go instead to Unparent, which means essentially just kick it out if it belongs to a group. Now notice it did not balk at the fact that the P-ball bottom and top were not part of a group. It just said essentially if you're part of a group I will kick you out of that group, if not, no harm no foul. These groups are relatively useless now, and I can delete them with impunity, saying that all I really want is this modified geometry. We also now want to take these pipes and make them part of this layer. So just as an example, I'll grab these two, and right-clicking on the name of the layer and holding it down, you have the option to add selected objects. Now note that I didn't grab them all because I want to make a demonstration of how you can validate what is and is not in a layer. You simply press the visibility channel, and the one that's left over should be added as well. The minute it is, it goes away. So that is basically the end of step 3. Make sure that you have deleted all of your history and save scene as number 3. Okay, let's begin step 4 of building the phantasm ball. We're going to start building a new piece, so grab the visibility of the P-ball layer, click it off, and get rid of the outliner. And let's go to Create Polygon Primitives and bring in a cylinder, and we're going to be using these numbers for them. Radius is going to be 2, the height is going to be 2, and the subdivision axes in this case will be 12. Also, as long as we're dealing with the construction and orientation, I'd like you to rotate this 90 degrees. Just type in 90 here and rotate Z. And on one end of this sort of bass drum looking object, we want to grab the faces on one side using any of the methods we went over. In this case, I want to grab, let's just be silly here, and go to Convert Selection Faces and just delete those faces. In the other case, we want to select these faces. I'm going to use a different method. Select all, then grab what you don't want, unselect what you don't want. How was I able to do that? I am magic. So under Edit Mesh, we want to extrude face, and we're going to be scaling this down. Scale it down a bit. And then going into Edit Mesh, doing the same thing for a bit. We're going to be going a bit out, kind of maybe half a unit or so. Going into Edit Mesh again, and this time we're going to be scaling up. Made kind of a little divot there. And extrude again. We're actually going to be building this thing largely using extrusions, and this will be slightly new as well. We're going to be extruding not once but twice out in the same axes, but the second extrusion you're going to want to scale in slightly, so it's got that kind of barrel of a sci-fi gun look. And the last extrusion, similar to the Mario pipe that we made, is going to be pushed slightly in, like so. And then you can deselect. So now we've got this nutty little kind of jet engine looking object. And we want to put in two seeming slots where like an electrical outlet. And for this we're going to be using something called booleans. And booleans is where you can take one object and use it to dig out a section in another. And it's also very brittle. It is something we've that I want to showcase, but I really don't want people to depend upon, because booleans get very picky and choosy and crashy when the geometry is not simple and or it has a lot of history. And that's usually when you want to use booleans, and it's very uncooperative as to why it's not doing the boolean. So with that dire warning, let's try it. So go up to Polygon Primitives, Cube. We're going to read in a cube here, and we are going to scale it so that it looks a little more like a socket. And let's go with some actual numbers here to make sure that we have some uniformity. One end, let's say 1.5. Whoops, that's translate. We don't want translate, we want scale. So here we are with scale. Let's say negative, so let's say 0.2. Let's say 1.5 and 1. Well, this is obviously rotated the wrong way, sir. There we are, rotate 90. There we go. You may have been building yours in another axis, but you can quickly turn this using these numbers so that it is uniform. Also, we want to make sure that we have them. We have two of these, one on either side, that are symmetrical. And so if one is 2.5, we could make maybe 0.5. Again with the wrong axis. Let's see, negative 0.5. There we are. And if I duplicate this, the outliner again, boom, I could have that translate using positive 5. And they're both sticking out, sticky bits of geometry, but they're both interpenetrating enough that we know that we can use one to dig out a hole in the other. So here's how this whole Boolean thing works. I'm going to go back to wireframe unshaded. I think it helps in this case. So what you want to do is you want to select the object from which the object that you are going to be manipulating. Either you're going to be adding to, or you're going to be, in this case, digging out geometry from, and then you shift select the geometry that will be doing the digging. And with those selected exactly in that order, we then come up to Mesh, pop down to Booleans, and there are three options here. We want neither union nor intersection, we want difference. And there you are. You've dug a perfect hole out of this bit of geometry. And since this is now selected, you can shift select the other toothy bit and go again to Booleans and difference, and it should show you a nice little tool where you now have two slots to plug in a vacuum cleaner. So part of the cleanup when you deal with things like this is I wanted to show the outliner here. All of these are not groups that you made. Why do they exist? Well, if you look at them, they have a number of invisible things called transforms on them. And essentially this is the ghost of fairly heavy-duty operations in the form of visible history. So were you to delete these, you would effectively, no, you would actually delete this object. The only way you can get rid of this history is you want to come up here under delete all by type and just go down to history. Those groups then disappear, and this is now its own model with its own integrity. Now a couple of things, although this does look good, let's look closely at this sort of these slices of geometry pie with these new sockets put into them. It looks pretty clean. Unfortunately, when we go to vertices, where we really gauge the integrity of a model, look in here. We've got these vertices that are really crazy, and you got 3 that are very close, making this the dreaded n-gon, which means that it's a 5 or more sided poly. And since this is, each of these pie slices here are planar, we don't need that. So one of the methods we can use is a grid snap. So you want to get up close and personal on some of these, and grabbing each of the vertices, give them using, not grid snap, using the X that we've done thus far, but in this case vertex snap, V. Holding it down, you can then snap it to a nearby corner. And you want to take all of these vertices that are landing on a line and not at a corner and give them the home of a corner. And what this will do, since the geometry stays about the same, is it will not compromise the planar quality of this geometry. It actually starts cleaning it up and drawing the same plane in fewer polygons. And you can see that this is somewhat time consuming, but it does help the geometry substantially to have this amount of cleanliness. And this is the stuff of which really good models are made, because they not only use the least amount of polygons possible, but they still keep the shape you're looking for. So on the left side now, we've sort of cleaned up the faces, the amount of faces necessary to make that same planar shape, whereas the one on the right here is a mess. And we have to basically go in and do the same thing. You never want to compromise the corners, of course. Corners are what dictate that shape that we just dug out using a Boolean. So I'm going to instead snap all of these other vertices to the corners depending upon proximity. And after that, we unfortunately cannot leave it like this, because what's happened is we have vertices all living on top of each other, and it's not going to do well for the computation time of a game engine. So what we want to do in this case is that we've put these vertices, these vertexes, all kind of on top of each other, and you can tell that they're on top of each other because if you simply, without the selection square, I'm not using a selection square, I'm just clicking on one, and you drag it out, you see another one still exists there. So these things are all kind of on top of each other. We know that because we placed them there. And we want to merge them together now. There's several different clusters of vertices all living in the exact same space. So I'm going to try and resolve them in one great merging by grabbing not individual vertices, but I want to grab the entire object. So in this case, we go up to Edit, and we go to Edit Mesh and Merge Components. And the merging of the components is, it basically goes through every vertex on this entire object, and if the threshold is higher than 0.1, i.e. the proximity between two vertices, they will always be welded. And if we press this, either apply or merge, I can then go back in and do the same test I did previously where I just click on a vertex, only now when I move it, it's the only one there. See that? Everything's following with it. So that gives me the assurance I'm looking for that I have consolidated those little families of vertices together. Now, as sort of a nice little topping on this geometry pie, I am grabbing both of the rectangular openings, shift, double click, got them both at the same time, and I'm going to extrude the faces. No, I'm not. See, that's what happens when you do the wrong thing. I'm glad I could point that out. Edit Mesh, go down to Edge, extrude, because they're not bloody faces, and you go backwards in time. So I've done the Mario pipe trick where I've pushed them back, and those ringlets, those back bits are still selected, you see. Let's do a little trick with them because we can see through them. I see you. And what I would like people to do is be aware that we now have a cool little tool under mesh called fill hole, and it will not fill the hole that is the entirety of this open area here. It will concentrate only on the selected edges. So in this case, fill hole will simply fill those holes with a piece of geometry. Very cool. Alright, so we're about the last stages here. What we need to do is go into our cleanup routine. This is best shown by taking off the wireframe on shaded, grab the whole object, let's go in and soften the edges, and what a mess. So now we do our trick of basically double clicking each of these edges that are 90 degrees or more, of which there are quite a few, including these openings that we made. And looks like it no longer recognizes that double clicking one of them is going to grab the outer edge of this socket. So I'm just going to go back to the old school method of shift click and this double click bit here. And also don't forget the inner rings also. And if we go back now to normals, harden edge, there's that weird bit of business there. Did I forget to harden that specific edge? Haha, that was the problem. And on more than one occasion, a student will come up and say, what is wrong with this thing's shading? And that's usually what it is that you've got too many surfaces that are too complex for it to calculate very nicely the normal shading. Also, you can grab faces and say the normals should be hard on those, and that will give it even more clarity since it's now drawing the inner corridor of these things as flat faces. So there we are. And you still have this nice smooth looking object done in as few faces as possible. Pretty cool. And at this point we want to just out of trying to make sure that the computer doesn't get the best of you. You want to make sure that you save these even though we're not done with stage 4. Now what we want to do with this particular object is we want to mirror the geometry, and Maya has a way of doing this. Under mesh, you've actually got this thing called mirror geometry. Don't just click on the command for it, go into the options for it here in the square, because the options will dictate in which direction do you want this thing mirrored. Now, it's obvious to you, the creative person, it goes here. But Maya's a computer and doesn't care, and it will make all kinds of very bad artistic judgments if you let it. So if you say +X and you mirror it, then these bullets are now kissing. If you go into mesh and mirror geometry, and you have well, it's obviously not +Y because we're not dealing in this axis. So were you to do -X, let's try that instead. Apply. There we are. Lovely. And by the way, using apply instead of using the middle button instead of the leftmost button on most of these commands means it will execute the command but keep this option window up. And if you're hunting around for the right command, that can be best to just leave it up for a while. We can also grab this edge and come up. One of the things that we haven't done much of that I want to make people aware of is just like we've done a lot of extrusions, we can do some cleanup. Just as we merged vertices together, this is the only way you can actually delete edges, is to grab the edge and then go under edge, delete vertex. It is, word of warning, people press delete all the time for things other than faces. Don't do that, because even though Maya will get rid of the edge, it leaves the vertices on there, and that's even more confusing. So we now have this little unit that is going to adorn the top of our P-ball. So let's bring the ball back online, and let's, in the outliner, grab that little cylinder that we've made so pretty and move it up. What we have here is a pretty odd little asymmetrical thing as far as the pivot point's concerned. So we go in to modify the center pivot that I went over earlier, and in this case it'll help you because it will put that pivot exactly in the center of the average mass of the object, which now means that that's the exact center. Wonderful. And what does that let us do? Well, that lets us go up into these orthographic side views, such as this one, and now use grid snap in the direction you want it to align perfectly, and it will align perfectly. So that now you can, with confidence, say that's exactly where it should be. Let's use the scaling a bit to make this a little bigger and a little fatter, so it looks like a proper adornment that one would find on a phantasm ball. And that's just eyeballing it. There's no real, I'm not too worried about it. I am trying to make it look like, you know, Wall-E's mutant brother, where you've got a bit of a neck bit and then it's going up into the whole of this object instead of cutting through the sides. So just use your judgment. And I'm going to call this the P-ball head. Kind of looks like a head, doesn't it? The eyes. And that is it for ball 4. Save scene as. I made an error. This should have been 3.5. It's now 4. I'm going to still not save over my work. 4.1. And there we are. Okay, home stretch. This is step 5. Let's turn the visibility off of the phantasm ball layer. Let's add this new odd head to it. And let's make the last antenna that we need to for the phantasm ball. For this, we're going to be reading in a cylinder. Press the F to get up close, and as we always do, we need to make sure that we're all dealing with exactly the same type of geometry. So in the radius, let's make this 1.5. The height, let's make it 8. And the subdivision axes for this exercise, we needed it 10. And the subdivision's height, which we have not yet touched, let's make that 7. And it's very important to have this as 7 because this runs these ringlets around the stalk that we are now going to be utilizing. And the other thing we're going to be utilizing, and I just want to kind of call it out now, is the fact that when we extrude, and we will be extruding, you're going to not be doing what we've been doing thus far, which is, remember the first control that pops up when we use extrude. We've been sort of saying don't use that. It's moving it in the direction of the normal of each of the polygons it has selected, and we wanted things to move perfectly uniformly. Well, in this particular case we don't, and so just be aware of that. And be careful, as we are now going to be grabbing sections of these rings and scaling every other one. So in this case, we're going to be grabbing this bunch of faces, go up a bit, this bunch of faces. The reason I'm sort of traveling like this is I'm trying to make the ringlets I grab as parallel as I can, so that when I extrude them, they're all kind of uniform. So here we are, extrude face. Now, as I mentioned, we usually go over here and say, no, I want the move and I want the rotate and the scale. We want exactly this control that it gave us. And while it looks like it's all going in one direction, it's basically choosing a polygon to say, this is going to be going in the direction of the normal, but all of these polygons will be going in the direction of their particular normal, which means if we grab it and push in, they all push in relative to their normal. So we are able to make a poodle antenna, long coveted in the CS community. And we then go in and grab the vertex. Whoops. That was something I didn't mean to choose, and it always looks really weird, and people go, "Professor, my computer has a disease. What is it?" And the thing is that you've slipped and chosen vertex face rather than vertex. Once you go to vertex, it returns all is good, the village was saved. So with the vertex selected, a single vertex up on top of this antenna, let's just give this thing a hat. Kind of poke it up there. Now in object mode, what's the last thing we need to do? The faceting. So in this case, we use, actually let's try something. Let's do this. Let's go on faces again. There and there. And I'm wondering if this would be faster. I don't think the faces on these inner radiuses matter much. So let's try this. Normals, soften edge. Looks like it didn't work at all. Cool. So we could have done that to the entire object, and in this case we want to now grab the ringlets, as we've been doing pretty uniformly with all these other objects. It's a little easier for me to grab them depending on my angle of view. I can grab those that are best viewed up on top, and then on bottom, normal, hard edge. There we go. Excellent. And the faces at the bottom we want to delete, as we will not see them, so that's a select unselect trick, and then a delete. So let's pull back now and take a look at this object. Too far. That's pretty good. Whoops. That dark coloring makes me realize we missed an edge. And there we are. Good deal. All right, the other thing we want to do with this is make sure that it rotates correctly. And so what we want to do is grab its pivot point and lower it to the bottom of the object, which we can't do from here, but we can from, say, the right view. So if I press insert, I'm now in the mode of manipulating this, of course. I'm grabbing only the y-axis controller, and I'm going to press, in this case I can press X, but I can also press V, because there's a vertex exactly on the grid, so 6 of 1 is fine. Boom. Which one did he use? You'll never know. So with the antenna grabbed and the rest of the phantasm ball revealed, let's bring this antenna up and give this guy a hat. There we are. And so what we want to do in the window outliner, make sure that we've got a renamed antenna, probably incorrectly spelled, and rotate it in that direction. Wrong. And this is why we want to sort out the pivot point further to match exactly the middle nose of the sort of the meeting point of these 6 edges, right where that vertex is, according to the orthographic view here. So if I want it to rotate along this edge, just like we did with the pipes rotating along the sphere, I need to grab this pivot point and not make it at the bottom of the stalk as much as I need to make it right in the center here. And for that I am using V, because it is a vertex, it's not a grid, but I was grabbing only the Y controller so that no matter where I went, left or right, it only adhered to points, vertexes along the vertical vertices. So now what I can do is rotate this 45 and it slides delightfully along this guy's skull, giving him a jaunty chapeau. So that's 45. We can duplicate it and type in -45. And now we have a very unknown Pokemon. And that's essentially what you need to do to build the Phantasm Ball. Now, very crucial last bits. Do not combine these. They need to stay separate because the next week you're going to be going into texturing. It will be very hard to try and make sense of the spaghetti that is the UVs of this thing if you merge them all together. It's much better digested one at a time and then you combine them. So what you can do is you can save it once. In fact, let's save it 2 times here. And one will be Phantasm Ball 5 history, because I've done no cleaning up lately of the history, and delete all by types history. And now I can save scene as and just do it without the word history. Overkill? Oh yes. So that is how you build the Phantasm Ball, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact myself or the TA.